At the post office in Brattleboro, Dorothy Hapgood collected her social security, and the clerk, young with polished nails, the kind who doesn't stay in a town like Chesterfield, counted the bills, pushed them across, and said without looking up, 11.20, sign here. And the man behind her in line, from the city, in a leather jacket, picking up a package, said to his wife, not to Dot, but the way people say things in post offices, loud enough for the whole room, 1,100? For a month? I spend more than that on dinner. His wife tugged his sleeve, but too late. Dot had heard, and the bills in her hand grew heavier, and $1,120, which a minute ago had been a check, became a sentence pronounced by a stranger in front of 4 witnesses. Chesterfield, Vermont. 74 years old. A balsam fir grove behind the barn and the 120 wreaths hanging in the dark, tied for a husband who'd been gone 2 years. She didn't know yet that those wreaths, and that grove, would change everything. Friends, write in the comments, what city are you from, and does your social security last until the end of the month? We want to know who's listening. And hit that like button so this story reaches the people who need it right now. Irene called on Sunday evening at 7, the way she called every Sunday at 7, and Dot was already sitting by the phone. Not a cell phone, but the landline, wall-mounted, with a coiled cord, installed in 1994 and still working the way Dot herself worked. Slowly, with occasional static, but without interruption. Her daughter's voice was the voice adult children use when delivering bad news, and already bracing for the fallout. A tone waterproofed against emotion, the way you'd waterproof a jacket against rain. Mum, we're not coming this summer. Steve's on a contract job through September. Artie's got SAT prep every day and can't miss, and my vacation isn't until October. Mum, I'm sorry.
I'll send more, 200 instead of 150, for the pharmacy, for the general store delivery.
Dot was silent. Silence in a Vermont farmhouse is not quiet. It's a sound. The wood stove ticking as it cools, a mouse in the cellar. Dot had named her Mabel and didn't set traps because Mabel was the only creature that stirred in the house since Earl. Wind in the chimney, and somewhere beyond the tree line, a barred owl calling into the dusk. And Dot listened and counted the calls, the way she'd counted them every evening for 50 years, and thought that the owl probably lied, because 74 years were already behind her, and if the owl promised 9 more, that put her at 83. And 83 in Chesterfield was already heroic. Mum, you there? I'm here, Irene. Come in October. I'll have the potatoes dug and the apples in. She hung up, gently, onto the cradle, and the click was the last sound from her daughter until next Sunday, and the week between Sundays in Chesterfield was long, the way a winter night is long, except it didn't end in dawn, but in another phone call. Dorothy Hapgood, 74, Chesterfield, Vermont, 20 miles from the county seat. A post and bean farmhouse on Hapgood Road, 1,100 square feet, wood stove, well water carried by bucket, propane for the kitchen stove. A tank refill cost $380 and lasted 3 months, and every time Dot calculated, $380 is 2 trips to the general store, and 2 trips are bread, butter, flour and coffee for 6 weeks. 23 houses on the road, 14 occupied, and each year 1 fewer, because the old die and the young don't come. And the road thins the way a snowbank thins in April, slowly, muddily, irreversibly. Earl died 2 years ago, in May, in the garden, between the onion row and the carrot row. Hart fell face down, and Dot found him 10 minutes later, came out to call him for lunch and saw his back, still, in the flannel shirt she'd washed on Monday. And the shirt was clean, and the back was still, and the soil was wet from rain, and Earl's face lay in the furrow he'd been digging, and the furrow was straight, like the life he'd lived. The ambulance from Brattleboro took 35 minutes, and for 35 minutes Dot sat on the ground beside him and held his hand. And the hand cooled, and she felt it cooling, but didn't let go, because letting go meant agreeing, and she didn't agree, and still hadn't. And the hook in the barn where Earl's wreaths had hung for 20 years was the best proof of that. 36 years Dot had worked the milking parlour, Hapgood family farm, Earl's operation, 40 head of Holsteins, up at 4, hands aching by the end of every shift, fingers that didn't unbend until evening, and the smell of the barn on her skin until bedtime. And Earl would hold her hands and say, "Dot, you smell like the cows." And she'd say, "And you smell like the compost." And both laughed. And the laugh hadn't gotten quieter in 36 years. Social Security, $1,120, spousal benefit. Because Dot had worked the farm without a W-2, without wages of her own, and the government counted the years she'd milked and fed and carried and cleaned as if she'd been idle. And $1,120 was what idle looked like in a monthly check. From Irene, $150, now $200. Property tax and insurance, $245. Propane, electric, firewood, $285. Firewood was the big line. 4 cords per winter at $250 each, and Dot saved $85 a month starting in spring, the way you save for a funeral, quietly, steadily, without hope that it won't be needed. Prescriptions, $175. Blood pressure, joints, eyes. Evenings she worked by the wood stove light to save electricity, and her eyes punished her for it. By nightfall, everything blurred, like a landscape through a wet window. Groceries, $310, and half came from the garden. Gas for the truck to town, $65. Left over, about $105, but only with Irene's money. Without it, negative $45. And $105 in Chesterfield didn't stretch. It covered the boot that needed resoling, the hinge that broke, the thing you couldn't predict but knew was coming, because in an old farmhouse, something always breaks. And the law of something always breaking is more reliable than the law of gravity. In the barn hung wreaths, 120, on hooks and along the walls, balsam fir and grapevine and dried winterberry, tied the last 2 autumns, dry, even, dense. And the smell of them lingered even in spring. Balsam, dusty, the smell that makes you think of December and want to live. And Dot walked into the barn every day, just to stand, just to breathe, just to touch the wire on a wreath, and remember how Earl took one off the hook every December, silently, on the first Saturday of the month, and hung it on the barn door. And the wreath stayed there through February, and by February the needles had dried but still held. And Earl would say, "Dot, that wreath's tougher than I am." And it was the highest compliment Earl could manage. And Earl was sparing with compliments, the way the soil is sparing with yield in a dry year. Saturday, Pete Stanhope came by for salt. Pete, 62, retired army sergeant, 2 houses down the road. Solid, mustachioed, quiet. The kind of man for whom please was 1 word a year and got to was every day. Ran a Christmas tree farm and farm stand. His own land, 5 acres of balsam and Fraser fir, cut your own in December, and a roadside stand on Route 9 where he sold wreaths, garlands and hot cider to tourists. He walked through Dot's yard, past the barn, and the barn door was open. Dot was airing them. Spring moisture and mildew on a wreath is the end of a wreath, the way rust on a nail is the end of a nail. Pete looked in, stopped, and stood silent for about 10 seconds, which for Pete was the equivalent of a half-hour speech. "Dot, you've got enough wreaths in here for 3 farm stands. Sitting here, gathering dust. Who are they for?" "Made them for Earl. By habit. Hands do it. Head doesn't ask." Pete stepped inside, lifted a wreath off the hook, turned it over, bent the frame, It flexed and sprang back, not a needle dropped. Shook it, nothing fell. Held it to his face and inhaled. And his face, which normally expressed three emotions, sternness, thoughtfulness, and hunger, expressed a fourth: approval. Dot, sell me 20, for the stand. Tourists ask for handmade wreaths every December, and what I give them is box store stuff that falls apart by Christmas Eve. Yours? I remember Earl's, he used to bring them over. Hold through February, not a needle drops. What's your price? Dot looked at Pete, at the moustache, at the hands, strong sergeant's hands, the kind that don't ask but take, and pay for the taking. At the wreath in his grip, held the way you hold a thing whose value you understand. And price sounded strange in the barn, unfamiliar the way music sounds in a church, appropriate in principle, unexpected in practice. In Chesterfield, you didn't sell to neighbours, you traded. A bucket of potatoes for a jar of honey, a wreath for a bottle of cider, help for help. Selling to a neighbour meant drawing a line, and in a rural town between neighbours there is no line. There's a fence. And a fence is not a boundary, but a landmark. Pete, just take them. For a neighbour, what price? Dot, not just take. For money. $25 apiece. At the box stores they're $40 and they're garbage. Yours are handmade, balsam, November cut, tied proper. Take 25 and don't argue. I'm a sergeant. I don't argue. I issue orders. $25 per wreath. Dot stood in the barn with a salt shaker in her hand. The ostensible reason Pete had come, but both had forgotten the salt, and calculated. 120 wreaths at 25. $3,000. More than 2 months of Social Security. For wreaths that had gathered dust for 2 years. For the work of hands that had tied them for a husband who wasn't there. For a barn door that no longer needed decorating. The hands remembered how to cut a bough, young growth, 2-year, flexible, dense needles. How to layer, large boughs outside for shape, small filler inside for density. Dried winterberry tucked in for colour. How to tie, florist wire, 2 wraps around the frame, Earl's hitch, the knot he'd learned in the army, showed Dot on their second Christmas. Pull both ends even, Dot. Hold until it bites, and it won't come loose. Not in rain, not in wind, not ever. And it never had. And now the hands that remembered all of this for 50 years were learning a price. $25 per wreath. The first price in her life, because for 50 years Dot had tied wreaths free, for her own, for Earl, for the barn, for the living of it. And living didn't pay. But Pete would. All right, Pete, 25, 20 wreaths. Take them. Pete carried them away on his shoulder, bundled, and the bundles swayed as he walked, and the balsam needles rustled, and Dot stood at the barn door watching him go with her wreaths, and feeling what a person feels the first time they sell for money, something they've always given for free. Strange, new, unfamiliar, like new boots. They pinch, but they're the right ones. Pete took 20 wreaths on Saturday, and on Monday he came back with a different face, not requesting. Pete never requested. A sergeant doesn't request, a sergeant assigns. And not stern. Stern was default, like weather in Vermont, constant and expected. But surprised. And a surprised Pete Stanhope looked so unusual that Dot's first question was, "Pete, you feeling all right?" "Fine." "Dot, the tourists lost their minds. 6 people came through Saturday. I gave each one of your wreaths, and after they hung them on their cars, you know how people tie a wreath to the grill for the drive home, 3 of them came back inside and asked for a second. One woman said, 'Where did you get these? I haven't seen a wreath this full since my grandmother made them in the 70s. Another, 'Do you have more?' A third, Can I order 10 for my office? Dot, I need 20 more. And for November, 30. 20 plus 30 was 50. In the barn, 100 remained after the first 20. 50 out, 50 left. But Pete wasn't the only channel, because in October, Dot did something she'd never done. She took wreaths to the road. Route 9 ran through the edge of Chesterfield. Not a highway, a 2-lane, patched asphalt, but in autumn it carried leaf peepers, hikers, antique hunters pouring between Brattleboro and Bennington. And at the shoulder, between the village and the turn toward the covered bridge, people sold whatever they had. Mrs. Calhoun with strawberry jam in mason jars. Old Mr. Fitch with honey. A woman from the next town with dried herb bundles strung on twine that swayed in the wind and smelled of the woods for 20 yards. Dot set up a stand. 2 sawhorses, a sheet of plywood. Earl had built it in '89 for a yard sale, and it had outlived both the yard sale and Earl. 10 wreaths propped up and a cardboard sign. Handmade wreaths.
$35. Written in marker, large, because cars pass fast and the letters need to be readable at 40 miles an hour so the driver can brake in time.
First buyer stopped in 20 minutes. A man in a Subaru, heavy-set, in shorts, a weekender, with a wife in the passenger seat saying, "We're going to be late." But the man was already out and holding a wreath to his face, and his expression was the one men wear when smelling a balsam wreath in October on a Vermont roadside. Happy, foolish, and correct. "Ma'am, got any with pine cones?" "Pine cones in November. Right now it's balsam and winterberry." 2, $70. "And in November, I'll come back for pine cone ones. You'll be here?" "Every Saturday." He drove off, wife grumbling, wreaths on the back seat, and Dot watched the Subaru disappear and thought, $70 in 10 minutes. More than an hour's milking in the parlour, where a shift paid what it paid and the farmer's wife had no say in the number. Here, she set the number and the number stuck, and between her hands and the money was a line as straight as a furrow. No middleman, no parlour, no government deciding what she was worth. First Saturday on the road, 6 wreaths, $210. Second, 8, $280. Leaf peepers stopped, touched, sniffed, and Dot watched faces change. From indifferent, "Oh, a wreath," to surprised, "It's so dense," to decisive, "I'll take 3, one for my sister-in-law's birthday." A wreath in the hands of someone who knows is like a tool in the hands of a craftsman. By weight, by flex, by scent, you know immediately, good or not. And Dot's were good. And people felt it the way anglers feel a strike, not with the eyes, but with the hands. But the stock was shrinking.
Of 120, 40 were sold. 20 to Pete, 14 on the road, and 86 remained. And Pete needed 30 for November, and the road took 10 a week, and by late October Dot realised, if she didn't tie new ones, by Thanksgiving she'd be out. And Pete's tourists would go back to box store cardboard, and the Subaru man would come for pinecone wreaths and find an empty stand. She went to the Grove on a Monday at 6 a.m, before the sun climbed high enough to dry the dew, because balsam boughs cut with dew on them are pliable, the needles flex without snapping, and in drying they hold their shape the way a hand holds a memory, tightly, without thinking. The Grove started 300 yards behind the barn. Balsam firs, young and old, white-barked, and the morning light fell on the trunks in stripes, and the mosquitoes whined, and the grass was wet to the knee, and every step squished, and Dot walked in rubber boots, with a pair of pruning shears and a spool of florist wire in her jacket pocket, and her hands found the way on their own. This tree, good, branches young, dense. That one, old, sparse, skip it. Cut, stacked in armloads, carried to the clearing, and there, tied. Large boughs for the outer ring, filler inside,
Winterberry tucked in, wire 2 wraps, Earl's hitch knot, pull both ends, and it bites, and it holds, wet or dry. And every time she cinched the knot, Dot felt Earl's hands on hers. Heavy, rough, the same hands that had shown her. Like this, Dot. Pull and hold. Pull and hold. It won't let go. 15 reads a day. By evening, her back. Not aching, but burning, the way a blister burns in new boots. Bearable if you don't move, unbearable if you bend.
Dot lay on the bench beside the wood stove, the only place the back relented. Warm boards, heat soaking into the lumber, and the muscles surrendering, and the pain leaving, slowly, reluctantly. The way an uninvited guest leaves. You didn't call them, but they don't care. And lay until morning, staring at the ceiling beams, smoke darkened, cracked, and the crack was older than Dot, and would outlast her. And the thought was not sad, but calm, like a forest after rain. Everything in place, everything wet, and nothing to change. The next Saturday on Route 9, a pickup pulled over. Not the leaf peeper kind, but a work truck, mud on the fenders, a magnetic sign on the door. Green Mountain Decor, wreaths, garlands, event styling, Brattleboro. A man stepped out, mid-40s, solid, clean-shaven, in a canvas jacket with the look of someone who drives past 100 roadside stands and stops at none, except this one. He walked to the plywood, picked up a wreath, turned it, bent the frame, shook it. Not a needle fell. Held it to his face and breathed in, then looked at Dot. "Ma'am, who makes these?" "I do." "How many can you do in a season?" "Depends on the season and the back." He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Plain, small type. Craig Erickson, Green Mountain Decor, and a phone number. "I supply restaurants, inns, and event venues from Brattleboro to Manchester. I need 150 wreaths by mid-November. Balsam, mixed sizes, some with pine cone, some with berry. Wholesale, $20 each. Can you do it?" 150 wreaths. $3,000. Dot stood at her plywood stand, shears in her apron pocket, and the number hung in the October air between the sawhorses and the maples were turning, and the light was gold, and $3,000 was nearly 3 months of Social Security. For wreaths tied from trees that grew on her own land and asked for nothing in return.
Craig, 150 by mid-November. That's 6 weeks. I can tie 15 a day, but my back won't do 15 a day for 6 weeks straight. Can you get help? In Chesterfield, the youngest person on this road is 62, and he's Pete. Craig put the card on the plywood next to a balsam wreath and a jar of Mrs. Calhoun's jam and said, "If you find a way, call me. I'll take everything you make." And drove off, and the card sat on the plywood, 2 grams of cardstock, and weighed more than the $20 bill the Subaru man had left that morning, because the 20 was what happened, and the card was what could happen, and could always weighs more than was. 2 boys materialised the way things materialise in small towns, not through a search but through proximity. Wyatt, 14, red-haired, freckles that by June had spread across his face like poppy seeds on a roll, spent his summers at his grandmother's house 4 doors down and had nothing to do except his phone, which was everything and nothing. Mason, 15, dark, quiet, a head taller than Wyatt and 2 heads more silent, was staying with an uncle on the same road and was in the same condition of idleness that, in a town with no sidewalks and no cell signal past the bridge, turns a teenager into a porch fixture. Their grandmother, Mrs. Calhoun, the strawberry jam woman from the roadside, told Dot, "Dorothy, those 2 are going to rot on that porch. If you've got work, take them. $20 a day each and they'll thank you. Or I'll make them thank you." Wyatt looked at Dot the way teenagers look at adults offering work, with suspicion and concealed interest in equal measure. "Mrs. Hapgood, what do we do?" "Tie wreaths, balsam fir. I'll teach you in half an hour." Mason didn't look up from his phone, but his ear turned, and a teenage ear is a radar dish, operational even when the eyes are elsewhere. $20 for branches? Wyatt asked. For branches, for work, and for getting Mrs. Calhoun to stop banging her screen door. She'll bang it from happiness when she hears you're doing something besides staring at screens. They agreed. Both. Wyatt immediately. Mason after a minute. The minute being the time a teenager needs to resolve the internal conflict of phone or money into the decision, money now, phone tonight. The first day was a disaster. A beautiful, noisy, balsam-scented disaster of teenage incompetence. The Grove, morning, 8 o'clock, dew on the grass, mosquitoes whining, and sunlight slanting through the canopy in columns where gnats orbited like dust in a projector beam. Dot showed them. "See this branch? Young growth, 2-year, flexible, needles dense all the way to the tip. Bends without snapping. That's the one you want. And this one, see, it cracks. Old, stiff, bare spots. No good. In a wreath, it'll stick out like a bone in a fish." Wyatt cut thick, knotty, crooked branches that would have produced a wreath resembling not a wreath, but a bird's nest after a storm. Mason tied, and his knot was what Dot called a prayer knot, the kind that holds only as long as you're praying, and the moment water touches it, it unravels. And if you dipped that wreath in rain, it would come apart in your hands, the way a house of cards comes apart in a draft. "Mason, not like that, watch. Wire. 2 wraps around the frame, both ends. Pull even, same force, like this. This is Earl's hitch. He learned it in the army. 30 years ago taught me, and since then, not one wreath has come loose. Pull. Harder. More. There. Now try to undo it. Can't? Then it's right." Mason tried. It held. Tried again. Held. His face changed. From indifferent to focused, the way a boy's face changes when he makes something with his hands for the first time and sees that it holds. In the world of phones, nothing holds. You swipe and it's gone. A knot holds, and holds firm. And the sensation was new to Mason, and new pleased him, though he didn't say so, because 15-year-old boys don't say, "I liked that." They just repeat it silently. And repetition is more eloquent than words. By the third day, the boys worked. Not like Dot. Dot's wreaths were flawless. 50 years of practice can't be replaced by 3 days. But solidly, evenly, cellably. Branches cut right, young, flexible. Layered right, large boughs outside, filler inside. Knot. Earl's hitch. And by the third attempt, they cinched it so that Dot tugged and it held. And every time it held, she nodded. And the nod was praise more valuable to a boy than $20, though the $20 was also valuable. Production. Dot plus 2 boys. 40 to 50 wreaths a week. Balsam in September and October. The Grove 300 yards behind the barn. 4 hours in the morning, and by noon, 15 to 20 wreaths laid out to cure in the barn on the wire racks along the walls. And the barn filled. And the smell, balsam, dry, December-like, hung so thick that Pete came by just to stand and breathe, and stood for 10 minutes and said nothing, because the smell of curing balsam wreaths is the one thing that can make a retired sergeant shut up voluntarily. In late October, grapevine. Dot took the boys to the stone wall at the edge of the property, where wild grapevine ran in tangles 20 feet long, thick as a thumb, and the vine in October was bare of leaves and pliable, and you could coil it into a ring and it held its shape. and a grapevine wreath with dried hydrangea and bittersweet tucked in was a different animal from balsam. Lighter, airier, the kind people hung on kitchen doors year-round, and Craig had asked for 30 of those alongside the balsam. Dot showed the boys. Grapevine you don't cut, you pull. Hand over hand, gentle, like hauling a fishing line. It comes off the wall in one piece of your patient. If you yank, it snaps, and a snapped vine is kindling, not a wreath. She felt it on the walk back. After 4 hours in the grove where they'd gone for the last balsam run, after 12 wreaths tied, after the half-mile home with a bundle on her shoulder. The back didn't ache. It switched off, the way a machine switches off when overheated. Not gradually, but all at once. And Dot stopped in the middle of the path, between a birch and an alder, and could neither bend nor straighten, and stood, hunched, with the bundle pressing on her shoulder and the shoulder pressing on her spine and her spine on fire. Wyatt turned first. "Mrs. Hapgood, you okay?" And his voice was not scared, but lost. The way boys sound when an adult who seemed indestructible turns out to be otherwise. "I'm fine, Wyatt. Take the bundle off my shoulder, carefully." Wyatt took it. Mason stepped close, wordlessly, just walked over and stood beside her, and Dot leaned on his shoulder, and they walked the half-mile home, the three of them, and Dot walked holding Mason's shoulder, and every step was a hit to her lower back, and the half-mile was the longest of her life, longer than the half-mile to the clinic when Earl fell in the garden, and even longer, because then she'd been running, and now she could barely walk. 2 days on the wood stove bench. Warm boards, heat entering the lumber, muscles releasing, pain withdrawing slowly, grudgingly. Craig needed 150 by November 15th. 80 were done. 70 to go, of which 40 were balsam and 30 grapevine. The grove, 300 yards. The back, on the bench. And the boys were in the village, and the boys knew how to cut, knew how to tie, knew Earl's hitch. But balsam from spruce they might confuse. The needles look similar. And spruce in a wreath is a disaster. It sheds in 2 days, and a wreath that sheds is not a wreath, but a mess. On the third morning, Dot got off the bench, slowly, along the wall, the way you rise after an illness, testing, not trusting, and the body tested the way ice tests on a river. Carefully, 1 foot. Walked to the porch. Wyatt and Mason sat on the steps, not with their phones, but with knives, whittling wreath frames from grapevine. Dot had taught them, trim the tendrils, smooth the joints so the wire sits flat. And they whittled with focus and silence, and the shavings curled at their feet, and the smell of fresh-cut vine hung in the yard. "Boys," Dot said from the porch, "tomorrow you go to the grove, alone. 300 yards, past the stone wall, through the gate. Balsam, needles flat, soft, dark green, silver underneath, smell like Christmas. Spruce, needles sharp, poke your fingers, lighter green. If you're not sure, take a picture, text me. 15 wreaths, Earl's hitch, by evening." Wyatt looked at Mason. Mason looked at Wyatt. And between them, 1 second in which the decision formed. Go or don't. Manage or don't. And the second was longer than it seemed, and in it was not laziness or fear, but responsibility. Heavy, adult, for the first time in their lives. And the responsibility settled on the shoulders of a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, the way a bundle of wreaths settles. Heavy, but you carry it. "We'll go, Mrs. Hapgood," Wyatt said. "We know balsam from spruce. We're not dumb." "I know you're not dumb,"
Dumb doesn't tie Earl's hitch. Go. And text me photos if you're unsure. I'm here, on the bench, but the phone's beside me. The boys left at 6 a.m. Dot sat on the porch with her phone, the old flip phone Irene had given her 3 years ago, which Dot used for 2 functions, calling and checking the time, and now a third, receiving photos from the boys. At 9, first photo. A branch, long, flat needles, dark green. Mrs. H, is this balsam? Balsam. Cut it. At 10, second. A finished wreath on the ground, wire and shears beside it. This okay? Frame's a little loose. Wrap the wire once more at the top, otherwise, good. At noon, third. 15 wreaths in a row on the grass, and Wyatt beside them, red-haired, in a dirty t-shirt, scratched hands, and his face. Satisfied. Boyish. The face you see when someone's made something with their hands and it came out right. Dot sat on the porch and looked at the photo. 15 balsam wreaths tied by 2 boys without her, in the grove, with Earl's hitch, and every wreath was solid, and the balsam was correct. Not spruce, not fir look-alike, and the knot held. And her back burned, and the wood stove bench waited, and Craig waited, and 150 wreaths by the 15th would be ready, made not by 1 pair of hands, but by 3, and 3 pairs were stronger than 1, and Earl's hitch, which Earl had learned in the army and shown Dot on their second Christmas, was now tied by 2 boys who a week ago didn't know what a balsam bough looked like, and today could tell balsam from spruce by photograph and tie, correctly. Craig arrived on November 15th in a white cargo van with green mountain decor on the side, and the lettering on the van looked against the backdrop of Chesterfield roughly the way a tuxedo looks in a vegetable garden, appropriate in substance, absurd in setting. He backed up to the barn gate, stepped out, canvas jacket, clean-shaven, solid, with the expression of a man who has come for merchandise and is ready to either approve or turn around. Dot opened the barn. 150 wreaths stood along the walls in 3 rows, sorted. Balsam on the left, 100, dark green, dense, with the faint silver sheen of properly cured needles. Grapevine in the centre, 30, bare branch rings woven with dried hydrangea and bittersweet, airy and light, the kind you hang on a kitchen door and leave through spring. And mixed balsam with pinecone on the right. 20, the November specials, with cones wired in and a sprig of winterberry for red. The barn smelled so thickly of balsam that Craig, stepping in, stopped and breathed. Deeply, slowly, the way people breathe in a place where scent matters more than words. Craig inspected in silence, methodically, the way a warehouse receiver checks stock. Picked up a balsam wreath, bent the frame, flexed and sprang back. Shook it. Not 1 needle dropped. Held it to his face. Balsam, clean, with the dry sweetness that only proper shade curing produces. Never in sun, always in airflow. Then a grapevine. Light, balanced. The hydrangea tucked in evenly, and the vine coils tight, no gaps. Then a pine cone. Cones wired securely, and the berries, bright red, not shriveled. On every wreath, Earl's hitch, wire in 2 wraps, and Craig tugged 1. It didn't give. Tugged harder, held. And on his face appeared the expression Dot had seen on Earl's face when Earl tested her wreaths and said nothing. Approval. Dorothy, I've been in this business 3 years and I haven't seen wreaths this good. The wholesale ones from the distributor shed by the 2nd week. Yours? I bet they hold through March. Taking all 150, cash, like we agreed. He counted it out on the barn workbench. $3,000. The bills lay on the wood beside a spool of florist wire and Earl's pruning shears. Folding, with a wooden handle polished by 30 years of his palm. And Dot looked at the money and thought, $3,000 is nearly 3 of her checks for 150 wreaths that she and 2 boys had tied in 6 weeks. For balsam that grew behind the barn for free and would grow for another 100 years. Craig loaded the wreath into the van, carefully in rows so as not to crush the boughs, and the van pulled onto Route 9 toward Brattleboro, and Dot stood at the gate and watched until the white side panel disappeared past the covered bridge, and the dust settled on the road, and the road was quiet, and the afternoon smelled of cut balsam and money. And the money smelled of balsam because it had lain in the barn beside the wreaths. The roadside stand kept running. Every Saturday through November, sawhorses and plywood, wreaths and the cardboard sign. The Subaru man came back in November for the pine cone wreaths as promised, bought 5 and brought a friend, and the friend bought 3, and the friend's friend called the following week. "Can I order 12? We're renting a cabin for the holidays." And 12 wreaths for a cabin rental drove off to stow in the back of a Volvo. And Dot, handing them over, said, "Balsam, hang where there's airflow, not above a heater, and they'll last through February. Grapevine, anywhere, they're permanent. And the pine cone ones, a little mist of water every 2 weeks keeps the needles soft." The cabin renter typed the instructions into his phone, and wreath care directions from a 74-year-old woman on a Vermont roadside entered the group chat of a Burlington tech startup. And someone replied, "This lady knows her stuff." And the compliment reached Dot through no channel at all. But she'd earned it. Pete took his steady order, 20 wreaths a month through December at $25. And his tourists returned every weekend, and Saturday at Pete's stand with a Hapgood wreath became a tradition, and the tradition held tighter than any contract. The boys left at the end of August, school, back to their regular towns, and Dot gave each of them an extra 100, a bonus. And Wyatt said, "Mrs. Hapgood, we're coming back next summer, right?" And "Right," Dot answered in the voice you use for a yes you'd been afraid to hope for and had been waiting to hear. Mason said nothing, as he'd said nothing all summer. But at goodbye he showed Dot his palms, and on the palms were calluses, the first of his 15-year-old life. And he showed them with the pride you show a medal rather than a wound. And Dot looked at his hands and nodded. And the nod was worth more than the $100 bonus, because the nod meant the hands remember. And they'll remember when the phone is obsolete and summer's over, and Mason is not 15, but 50. And the calluses will heal, but the skill will not. Season totals, June through November. Craig, 150 wreaths at $20 wholesale equals $3,000. Roadside stand, roughly 60 wreaths at $35 average equals $2,100. Pete, 60 wreaths at $25 equals $1,500. One-off orders, neighbours, word of mouth, the cabin rental. 30 wreaths at $30 average equals $900. Total revenue, $7,500. Minus the boys, $20 per day times 2 times 25 days plus $200 bonuses equals $1,200. Minus wire, ribbon, shears, miscellaneous supplies, $350. Net, $5,950 for the season. Spread across 12 months, roughly $495 a month. Against Social Security of $1,120, that's $1,615 total. And Irene's $150 was no longer needed, and the absence of the transfer was not savings for Irene, but dignity for Dot. And dignity cost more than propane. Irene came in October, as promised, for a week. Walked into the barn and stopped. Earl's hook, the forged one, heavy, on which his wreaths had hung for 20 years, was empty. Every last one sold. And beside it, a second hook, new, which Dot had hammered in herself with the back of a hatchet in August, when the back had loosened up. And on the new hook hung 30 fresh wreaths, balsam, grapevine, mixed. The first inventory for next season. 2 hooks. The barn smelled of balsam and oak and dried hydrangea, and the smell was the same as it had been when Earl was alive. And the hook was the same, forged, only now there were 2. "Mum, you're selling wreaths?" "Selling them, Irene. To Pete, to the tourists on Route 9, and to a wholesale buyer in Brattleboro. $59.50 net for the season." "Mum, $6,000? For wreaths?" "For Earl's wreaths, Irene. He taught me to tie them. He showed me the knot. He knew the grove. I'm continuing, and he's helping, from wherever he is." Irene stood in the barn and was quiet, and the quiet was long, dense, like the air between the wreaths, scented and heavy. Then she hugged her mother, tightly, silently. And in the hug was everything the daughter hadn't said in 2 years of Sunday phone calls. "I'm sorry I didn't come this summer," and "Mum, you're strong," and "I didn't know you could," and "Thank you." And thank you was the main thing, and the rest hung around it the way needles hang around a branch in a good wreath, holding fast, not falling. Evening. Dot in the barn, between 2 hooks. Earl's. Empty, the iron catching the last light from the window. Hers, bearing 30 wreaths for the year ahead. On the workbench, Earl's shears, folding, wooden handle worn smooth, the wire spool half used. A cardboard sign leaning against the wall. Handmade wreaths, $35. And the smell, balsam, grapevine, winterberry, filling the barn the way it filled it every autumn, the way it had filled it when Earl was here and would fill it after, because balsam grows and hands remember. And between growing and remembering lies everything Dot needed. The grove, the wire, the knot, and the 2 hooks in the barn where one man's habit became one woman's living. And the living smelled of December, though it was October. And the knot held, wet or dry, the way it always had and always would. What did Dorothy Hapgood do? She didn't invent anything new. She'd been tying wreaths for 50 years. For Earl, by habit, for free. When Earl was gone, the wreaths stayed, unwanted. A neighbour who ran a farm stand said, "Sell me 20, and Dot sold. Then she set up a roadside stand on Route 9. Tourists bought. Then through the farm stand neighbour came a wholesale buyer who ordered 150 for the season. When her hands and back couldn't keep up, she hired 2 summer boys from down the road for $20 a day and taught them to tie. 3 sales channels: wholesale, the decor company; retail, the roadside stand; and local, the farm stand. Nearly $6,000 net for the season, more than 5 months of her Social Security. 3 lessons that work beyond wreaths. First, what you do by habit and give away for free has a price, and the buyer knows the price better than you do. Ask, name it, take it. Second, when your body can't keep up, find younger hands and teach them. $20 a day for a helper isn't an expense, it's scale, and scale feeds better than strain. Third, a rural road isn't a dead end, it's a resource. Woods, fields, a highway, tourists, everything is nearby and free, and all you need to do is stop tying for an empty hook and start tying for people. If in your barn, your closet, or your hands, there's a skill that neighbours have thanked you for,
Count what that thank you is worth.
And name the price.
Hit that like so this story reaches the people who need it. And subscribe. This is where we tell the stories of people who stopped giving it away and started earning with what they do best.